Today's session will be about marriage and how marriage has declined over the years. If you look at the following graph, you will see that marriage, there's fewer and fewer people getting married. And there's a combination for reasons for that. But before we get started why marriage is decreasing, let's talk about the history of marriage. During biblical times, marriage was seen as a unity between a male and a female, where there could be a stability of household. Most Western religious institutions hold marriage to be ordained by God for the union between a man and a woman. They see the primary purpose of the union is for companionship, rearing children, and mutual support for both husband and wife to fulfill their life callings. A lot of the recommendations in the Bible were formulated during the Roman Empire, when it was very brutal and harsh, and there was a need to rewrite the textbook on how to conduct one's life. They saw that a two-parent family is very important for the stability of the family unit and to rear kids. With a two-parent household was thought to provide a more caring and nurturing environment for children to develop and become civilized and productive members of society. Later on throughout the centuries, marriage became more economical. Later on throughout the centuries, the main goal shifted to that of marriage to serve as an alliance between families. So parents throughout the history arranged marriages for children that would benefit both sides. Most couples didn't marry because they were in love, but they married for economic reasons. So there could have been a family that was, say, locksmiths, and another family that were metal intruders, and each family, one had a guy that wanted to get married and one had a girl that wanted to get married. So they thought if they joined them together through marriage, they'd be better off economically. So that's how marriages developed as the centuries went on. Then in modern times, there's another entity that came into the fray, and that's the government. Where the government started to introduce tax penalties and also tax rules for those that were living alone as a single parent, and or being a married couple, or having kids. So along comes the government, and they start to introduce welfare checks for single mothers. And quite generous welfare checks, and also subsidised housing depending on what country you are in the world, and also health benefits associated with that. So the incentives for marriage in certain jurisdictions with very generous welfare checks for solo mums, it increased. But some governments have pulled back on that. Another goal for governments was to encourage marriage and have a tax credit associated with married couples. That's had various effects where people have been living together for the convenience of a tax break or a lower income tax bracket, and they're not necessarily in a relationship. So it has all sorts of outcomes when the government gets involved and implements policy. With the tax department, they value the cost of a child for the first 18 years at roughly $250,000. And that's just a basic upbringing. That's no private school, no overseas trips, no skiing trips. That's just the bare basics. That's the cost of having a child. So to help that, some governments have offered a cash bonus for every kid you have, to counter the declining population of certain countries. But this is also bad government policy because it encourages the production of kids rather than parents actually wanting to have kids. And love is an incredibly strong component of rearing kids and making them productive members of society. If there's no love there and the kids feel unloved, they can move into an area of crime and quite often can go off the rails if the love's not there. So those countries that are trying to counter their declining populations with a cash bonus for people that produce kids, they can have the wrong incentives. And it always reminds me of the 𝗪𝗁 story in India, where the British government wanted to get rid of a lot of snakes in Indian villages, so they introduced a certain amount of rupees for every snake tail that was brought into them. So this caused people to start to breed snakes to get the rupees. And the French had a similar situation in Vietnam with rat tails. They wanted to decrease the amount of rats, so they started to offer monetary rewards for people that brought in the tails of rats. So people started to breed rats. And it may not be too dissimilar to people who are starting to have kids for the cash bonus. So they're just pumping out kids to get the cash bonus. So government policy can quite often have the opposite effect of what the politicians wanted implemented. But anyway, getting back to marriage, there's a whole lot of reasons why marriage is declining, and I'm going to list quite a few of them in this video with a general overview. There could be lots of sub-videos for each different section. So let's continue. So getting married these days is not a cheap exercise. The cost is roughly $30,000 US. That's just the cost for an average wedding. And if you don't have the skills to organise it yourself, you have to hire a wedding coordinator, which can add another 10% onto that for their management fee, and a minimum fee too. And it's a highly pressurised environment getting married. I've been married twice, and there's a lot to organise for 3 or 4 hours or 5 hours of entertainment, and you've got to get it right if you're going to do it properly. And there's so many things to organise, from the flowers to the menus to the seating arrangements to the venue to the photography. The list goes on and on and on and on. And not to mention the dress for the bride, and the rings, engagement ring, wedding ring, and it just goes on and on and on. So a lot of people find they don't have a spare $30,000 in the bottom drawer to pay for the wedding day, so they don't do it. Yes, you can say, Scott, you don't need a big wedding. You can just do it casually. But there can be a tendency, I'm not saying this is correct, but if you have a drive-through shotgun wedding like in Las Vegas or other parts of the world where you can get married at a registry, just pop down in the afternoon and get the certificate, then you may not place that much value on the license you're receiving, and easy in, easy out. I'm sure there's plenty of success stories of people that got married through a shotgun wedding, but it can be a different type of feel to it. Another one is the registration of a marriage. It takes a lot of effort too. You've got to fill out a lot of forms. In this country, you've got to go to the births, deaths and marriages registry and fill out a lot of forms. So you need your parents' birth certificates, send them in with a big check. I think it's $300 or $400. I can't recall. But a lot of people can't fill out forms these days. You see it every day with people who can't fill out basic forms for transfer of bank accounts and so forth and so forth. It's becoming too complicated for a lot of people. So there's that. And also, once you decide to get married, should you go down that track, you've got to have your eyes wide open, because you're entering into an institution of marriage where there's an approximately 50% failure rate. Now, would you enter into a business contract that has a 50% failure rate? I wouldn't. So you've got to have your eyes wide open, because the government will have their set of rules on the institution of marriage and what happens should it come unstuck. So basically, if it does come unstuck, then you'll be inviting the government into your living room to sort out the division of assets, the custody of your kids, alimony, and so forth. And the list can go on. So if on average, 80% of women call off a marriage for various reasons. And there's various reasons why marriages get untangled. I'll name some, I'll go through some now, but what you've got to be aware of, that if you had a lifestyle that was way above the average, then you'll be up for some hefty costs to continue that lifestyle on for your ex-wife. So even if the kids were only costing $2,000 or $3,000 a month at the absolute maximum, it's actually less than that if you want to be really frugal, but different jurisdictions have different benchmarks on what it costs to bring up a kid. In New Zealand, it's $250,000 for the first 18 years, but when you split up, the court will look at your income and the lifestyle that you've had. So it's not uncommon if it's costing, say, in real terms, if it's only costing $1,000 or $2,000 a month, to actually be paying $10,000 per month per child based on the lifestyle that you had before you split up. So your ex will be taking that money, and there'll be separate arrangements for the kids and separate arrangements for her. So it can get very, very expensive. And if you're in a high-performing job where the company restructures and you get laid off and you don't have a paycheck coming in, you still got to pay your bills, and the tax department will come after you if you're not paying your bills. And they're not worried about you losing your job. They'll still want to see that money coming in. So it can be very harsh, very, very harsh. Also, throughout life, people can change. I'm completely different to what I was in my 20s, to what I was in my 30s, to what I was in my 40s and in my 50s. So in my 20s, you graduate in your early 20s from university. You're still in party mode. You're still developing a career. You're partying a lot. You're drinking a lot. As you move into your 30s, you start to pull back on the alcohol and take the family unit a bit more serious, and you look for a wife that you can have kids with, and you have kids. And you pull back drinking and focus on your young kids to give them the best opportunity possible. And then in your 40s, you're very busy with school events and developing your kids. And then once they become teenagers and leave, then you free up a lot more time and your focus changes again to other areas. And then in your 50s, you're different again because your kids are independent, and you've got a different social circle, and there's different wants and needs. So people can change throughout. So the lady you met in your 20s that you had a relationship may be quite different to the lady that's required in your 30s to have kids with. She may be a different type of personality, more maternal and more child-orientated. So there might be a different lady for different decades, depending on what stage of life you're in. I've also come across guys that have had midlife crises. I've never had a midlife crisis, but it's usually associated with a guy who married their sweetheart at high school. They went out with each other, then they got engaged, then they married in their late teens, early 20s. They were married for 20 years. They had 2 or 3 children. And then all of a sudden, the guy thinks he's missing out on something and has a midlife crisis, separates from his wife, goes buys a Porsche, and gets himself a 22-year-old girlfriend. And you see it both ways. Women also can go through that crisis too. And people change. So if you ever do decide to get married, these are all the sort of things you got to look at. Will people change throughout? If you with a wife, or vice versa, or a woman's with a guy, and you both change together as the decades evolve, then that's even great. I've seen that work too, and people work together as one unit and change. And if you can do that, and you've got compatibility, and you have the same physiological needs, then by all means, that's a win-win. But I'm seeing that very few and far between today. Another one is women that go through menopause in their 40s, late 40s, early 50s, and it affects women all differently. So some women have very mild effects from it. Other women, it severely affects them, and they have hot and cold sweats, and they can have mood instability, and it can affect a relationship. And I've known of plenty of couples where they've separated over menopause. It's become a driving divider amongst a couple. Again, there's videos out there on that particular chapter alone, menopause, so I won't go into the details here. Also, if you want to untangle your marriage at a later stage, it can be a very lengthy process. I know people that have had trusts, and to untangle those trusts, it's been like a 10-year process. People are still going through the courts, through complicated trust structures. And courts can overturn trusts. What you think is ring-fenced, it can be overturned, especially if the lady has set aside her career, her income earning potential to bring up the kids and let you go forward and develop your career. So she may seek reimbursement for her lost income from her potential to make money. And courts can go either way. I've seen it being very ruthless and crush guys and women, so it can work both ways, and vice versa. It can also be quite understanding and quite reasonable. So it really depends on who the judges are and who the lawyers are. And lawyers love separation and divorce settlements, because I once dated a divorce lawyer who chuckled to me about how they motivate their clients to keep suing so the clock can keep ticking. And they're this is her words, they're in an emotional, traumatic state where they only need slight egging on to go to the next round and sue. And this sounds pretty realistic. Women and men who have separated and they're acrimonious, and they want to get revenge and getting egged on by a lawyer, and at the same time you're incurring a huge amount of legal bills. So if you're ever going to go through a separation, divorce, the immediate thing is you've got to draw a line in the sand, freeze the bank accounts, don't let it drag on. Her expenses are her expenses, yours expenses are your expenses, and then get good representation. Don't penny pinch on lawyers. You'll get what you pay for. And if you get a good priced lawyer, they should be able to offer you excellent advice to untangle your mess. But you've got to control the lawyer and make sure they don't egg you on to keep suing. Another one is custody of the kids. It can get quite messy if the kids are still under 18. It can have an emotional effect on the kids, and they can be caught in between. And in all circumstances, you should actually put the kids first to make sure that the transition is as smooth as possible for them, because you don't want to get them too infected by the process. Now, if there's allegations of a third party involved, like someone having an affair, that can make the other person envious and want to get revenge. So quite often kids are used as a bargaining chip in separation and divorce, and some people play that card quite eagerly to get revenge if they feel they've being taken advantage of. So guys, you got to tread very, very carefully. It's a very sensitive issue. I know of another case where a couple were married, not in love. They had a $9 million business which they had an offer on, and then the acrimonious started between the two, and they started to fight and live in separate rooms of the house, not talking, not communicating. They were both employed in their business. The staff were getting mixed messages from the owners of the company. The lady was telling them to do one thing, and then the guy was telling them to do a completely different way of doing things. And there's a big staff turnover that started to happen. They decided to put the business on the market, but because they weren't communicating properly and driving the business forward and inspiring the staff, it started to crumble, and that business went down to $2 million value, and they eventually walked away with $1 million each, as opposed to $4.5 million if it was sold for $9 million. So it can cost a significant amount of money separating, and you've got to keep a level head. A lot of people say, Scott, offer people to get counselling, but it's no good getting counselling if both parties aren't willing to compromise. If there's one party that is totally doesn't value the counselling process or doesn't appreciate the process involved, then it's a complete waste of time. You've got to have 2 committed people to counselling. That's why I say counselling is a complete waste of time if you have one person that's not taking it seriously. And I'll be doing a separate video on counselling. So that's basically it, guys. Eyes wide open. If you're going to go into the institution of marriage, there's a combination of reasons why people get married. Mostly it's for the stability of the family unit and the rearing of kids. A 2-parent household is a lot better than a 1-parent household. Especially boys, they need a father to tell them the do's and don'ts and the wrongs and the rights, and offer a bit of discipline should they need it. But as we all know, marriages can go astray for a variety of reasons, as mentioned throughout this video. And there's approximately a 50% chance of a marriage going belly up. So would you really enter into a marriage if it's got a 50% chance of going belly up? So my advice to you guys is eyes wide open should you want to go down that track and go into the institution of marriage. That's it for today, guys. Don't forget to press the like button, comment in the comment section, subscribe, and if you have a story to tell, because a lot of people out there have stories to tell on divorce, on marriage, on separation, then email me. My contact email address is listed below. Look forward to talking to you on the next one. Cheers.